All right, hello everyone, and thanks a lot for joining us tonight. My name is Jeremy McLaughlin. I'm the chair of the ASIS&T student chapter here at San Jose State, and I'm happy to see so many new and familiar faces joining us this evening. Before we begin, I just wanted to go through a couple of quick announcements. Thanks to the members who identified themselves when they joined. If you haven't done so yet, please just type yes in the chat if you are a current ASIS&T member. And I'm going to turn it over to Kate Dillon, who's our membership coordinator, for just a few quick words. Kate.
Hi all, I am the membership director for this academic year, and I just wanted to mention that I know I'm preaching to the choir because there are so many members here tonight, but it's a great way to connect with opportunities you might not have otherwise while you're in school. And as an example, my involvement in the student chapter recently resulted in my being appointed to the Web Presence Task Force Committee for ASIS&T headquarters. They're redesigning their website, so that was pretty darn exciting, and you never know what treasures you'll find if you do become a member. So we have a fabulous video on our homepage right now that gives a great overview of opportunities that you'll have through membership, and you can also email me at the email address listed here on the slide, and Marissa just chatted our homepage address. So feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions, and enjoy tonight's event. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Kate. Yeah, we're always excited to bring on new members and see new faces, so definitely reach out if you're interested in getting involved. You see on the screen here a post-event survey bit.ly link. I've just put that in the chat room as well. Please open that up now, or you can wait till the end of the event. I will show it again. This is just a very short survey that we ask attendees to fill out for us, provide us a little bit of feedback about the event tonight. If you are interested in membership or getting involved with our student chapter, there is a comment box on this bit.ly form that you can fill out, and just give us your name and email address and we'll reach out to you. But we really appreciate the feedback there, so please open that whenever you see fit, and please provide us a little bit of information. So thanks very much. Finally, I'd just like to mention for our event tonight, in terms of question and answer, Michael, we're going to go ahead and hold the questions until the end. If you do have questions, you can feel free to either just hold on to them or type them out in the chat. I'll be taking those questions down and aggregating them, and we'll go over them at the end, at which point you can also feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak your question into the microphone and ask Michael directly. But otherwise, please just hold on to those, and we'll have a nice Q&A at the end of the presentation. Our event tonight is co-sponsored by the ASIS student chapter at the University of Denver. We're being joined by Leah Ledger, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that, but Leah is the chair of the student chapter over at DU, and I'm going to hand the mic over to her for a moment and let her introduce herself in the student chapter.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. I am excited to be here tonight. I am the chair of the ASIS&T at DU student chapter. Here at DU, we're mainly library science students, and we have events that run throughout the year. We have an event called Tech Bites, and we run those in between classes, and we have different speakers come in and do on different topics in technology, specifically related to library science. But we invite all of the school to come, and it's a great way just to get information out there and make it relevant to students. I really appreciate being asked to work alongside of you and co-sponsor this event, and thank you all for letting me be here. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Leah. We're really excited to be collaborating with DU on this and with other ASIS student chapters in general. It's a great way to engage the community, and DU is right down the street from me, which I don't think you knew that. Michael knows that, but you didn't know that. So who knows, maybe I'll be able to pop into one of your events one of these days. So thank you again for being here. So with all that, I would like to now introduce our speaker for this evening, Michael Levine-Clark. Michael is the Associate Dean for Scholarly Communications and Collections Services at the University of Denver Libraries, which, as I just mentioned, is a few miles away from me here in Denver. I've had the pleasure and opportunity of working with Michael in my professional career for a couple of years now, and I would be remiss to him and to Leah if I did not mention the beautiful new Academic Commons building that was recently erected on campus and is now the home of the library there. Michael writes and speaks regularly on strategies for improving academic library collection development. This includes, obviously, the use of ebooks in academic libraries, the development of demand-driven acquisition models, or DDA, and the implications of discovery tool implementations. If you're at all interested in scholarly communications, ebooks, discovery platforms, or academic libraries, his SlideShare content should get your pulse racing. As I mentioned, please hold your questions until the end, and or feel free to type them out, and I will pull them from the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael. So thank you for joining us tonight, Michael, and it's over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeremy, and thanks all of you for inviting me to be here tonight. As Jeremy said, I write regularly about ebooks, and I was just looking back at what I've written over time about ebooks recently, and what strikes me is I've been writing and presenting about ebooks since about 2005, and in that time, things have changed a lot, and things haven't changed very much at all. We've been talking for the last 15 years or so about the need for ebooks to work better in academic libraries, and we're still talking about that in much the same way. And yet, we've become more and more reliant on ebooks in academic libraries, and we're spending more and more of our budget, as I'll show you. We're relying on ebooks for a larger and larger share of the content that we provide to our users. And it's I think interesting that Jeremy mentioned the Anderson Academic Commons at the University of Denver, which is our renovated library. And it's interesting because ebooks indirectly made that possible. We took a library that was a very traditional library built in the early 1970s. In 3 or 4 years ago, it was a building that had a central core of book stacks and seating around the edges, and wasn't really designed for technology at all. It was designed as a warehouse for books first and a place to sit and read and study second. And electronic journal content, ebooks, the transition to digital content generally made it possible for us to reinvent our library by moving things off-site, by freeing up space, by making more study space, by making more group study space especially, by adding light and air. While ebooks didn't make that possible directly, the fact that we can provide more and more of our content to our users electronically did make that possible. So I'm talking about ebooks today. Some of the things that I can talk about really do pertain to electronic resources in general. I'm going to try to give you a sort of overview of where we've been and where I think we're going to go with ebooks. Jeremy sent me a bio form and an information form about this session and asked me to fill in the title and the abstract. And he had already put in Much Ado About Ebooks and DDA as a title. And I left it there. He said, you know, what, really? I just threw that in there. And I actually like it because I think it's perfect actually, because there has been a lot of ado about ebooks and about DDA over the last decade. We've been talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. Every conference you go to, there are dozens of presentations about some aspect of ebooks and DDA. And yet, we're not quite there. So we talk about it, but we're not really doing it right. We find that ebooks tend to be frustrating. They tend to be confusing. They tend to be hard to manage from a library perspective. They tend to be hard to use from a user perspective, which is interesting because on the consumer side of things, ebooks are pretty easy and have become quite successful. It is not at all uncommon for people to read happily and successfully an entire novel or multiple entire novels on a Kindle or some other ebook device. It's easy, it's straightforward. The process of acquiring that book is intuitive. The process of reading, while in some ways not as pleasant as the process of reading a print book, is good enough, and in some ways is better. They've fulfilled their promise and then some, and yet in the academic realm, that's not true at all. So going back through the literature a while, we hear, and we have been hearing for years, that ebooks don't quite work. So this piece in 2007 by Lynn Conway and Heather Wicht, and Lynn now works for OCLC and Heather works for the University of Colorado at Boulder Libraries, but they used to both work for NetLibrary, which was the first successful vendor of academic ebooks. And so they know quite a bit about what they're talking about, and even they see that things in 2007 weren't quite where they should have been. There were problems in terms of standards. There was incompatibility in terms of rights. There were price models that didn't quite fit into what you would expect. It doesn't seem reasonable to pay, say, $50 for a print book and have the ebook equivalent be $150. And yet that's what we see in the academic realm for ebooks very often. A higher price, a strange price, an incomprehensible price sometimes. The purchase models are varied, the access models are all over the place. And discovery is not as easy as it should be. You would think that with ebooks being full-text searchable, it would be easier to find the ebook itself. It would be easier to use it. And they're not easy to deliver. It's hard to get that thing to the reader that you want to read it on. And they were saying this in 2007, and I would say that every single one of those things is still true today. And then in 2010, another article about ebooks, Robert Slater said, wouldn't it be great if it was just as easy to buy an ebook as it is to buy a print book? And if you think about that, of course, it really should be. When you buy a print book for the library, you don't have to have a specialized vendor to get that particular print book. You go to your vendor of choice and you buy it, because everybody has access to a print book. You can buy it from Amazon. You can buy it from the bookstore in your local town. You can buy it from a jobber like Ingram or Baker and Taylor if you're a public library, or from somebody like YBP if you're an academic library. It's really easy to get a print book, and it's the same print book, and it doesn't matter which vendor you work with. With ebooks, there's this whole layer of complexity that gets added on, in that you have to figure out where you can get that ebook, and then you have to figure out, okay, there's 5 different versions of this ebook out there from 5 different vendors. Which one works the best for my particular need and for my particular set of resources at my institution? And it's a difficult thing still 4 years later. So stepping I guess back into my library, away from this sort of general view of where ebooks have been. Why do ebooks matter? Why do we care about ebooks? Why are we interested in them? And I think it's always useful to think about the library mission. The library mission is what should drive everything that we do. And if the mission isn't driving what you're doing, or if you're doing a lot of things that don't fit into the mission, you should look at that mission pretty carefully and think about whether you need to change your mission. The mission statement for the University of Denver Libraries is fairly broad, and And there's not much that talks about collections, but what it does say about collections is they should support the teaching and research programs of the university. And it doesn't say anything about preserving collections for the long term. It doesn't say anything about the cultural record, which is important, but isn't actually in our mission statement. Our mission is about teaching and about research. It's about our current faculty, our current students, our current community. And ebooks meet that mission really well in a lot of ways. Ebooks allow us to make a wider range of content available to our users than was ever possible in the print world. And I'll talk about why as we talk through some of the models for providing content. But it's true that you can make many more things available to your users in the ebook world. And it's true as well in the journal world. As we've moved from title-by-title subscriptions to print journals into large-scale packages of e-journals where we're paying for this big package instead of a title-by-title. Discounts are built in for committing to this large-scale purchase, and you end up with much more content, or roughly the same as what we were paying in the past. The same thing is happening with slightly different flavors in the ebook world. Ebooks allow us to serve students who are not on campus, and that's true whether these are students who are thousands of miles away or whether they're students who are in an apartment that's a block away. They are easy to use without having to come to the library. And while we want people to come to the library, we don't want to force people to come to the library just to get a book, especially if they're in the middle of a research project. Ebooks don't take up any space. They take up server space, of course, but that server space is in Mountain View, California, or it's in Sydney, Australia. It's not on my campus. Ebooks are housed somewhere in the cloud. And because of that, we can do things like renovate our library because we can move a lot of print books off-site. We can rely on ebooks for discovery so that they can point students to those print books, or we can rely on them as full-scale substitutions for those print books, depending on the preferences of the user. Ebooks are searchable, so they're both the content that you get to at the end and the discovery tool that helps you get to that content. And all of this, or some of this, is in theory more than in practice, especially that last one. Ebooks are searchable, but they're not searchable in a really good way when integrated across discovery tools like Summon or Primo or EDS, EBSCO Discovery Services. When you start to talk about discovery layers, ebooks kind of fail to live up to their promise for a variety of reasons. But in theory, all of these things are true, all of these things are good, and all of these things meet our mission of providing content to our students and our faculty in a meaningful way. But at the same time, they're incredibly confusing. And they're confusing to users and they're confusing to librarians. And I've got some things here that are mostly about what's confusing to librarians. But some of the stuff is confusing to both parties. So most monographs don't come out as an ebook. And that's maybe surprising to hear, but we're still at the point where most scholarly books published in the world, not necessarily in the US, but most scholarly monographs don't ever come out as an ebook, or they don't come out as an ebook for many years after, or many months after the print. We still need to buy print in some cases, but it's often hard to predict whether a book is going to become available as an ebook or whether it's only going to be available as print. Ebooks are often released well after the print book, and that's also probably surprising because almost every monograph that's produced today, at least in any mainstream publisher, is produced as a digital format first. So it exists as an ebook essentially before it ever becomes a print book, and yet the ebook comes out often after the print. This is important because we rely on purchase and acquisition through a variety of models at or very near the point of publication. And if we have to wait too long, we don't know whether that book is ever going to come out as an ebook. And you're forced with a decision of, do I buy the print book at all? Do I buy the print book and then maybe get the ebook eventually? Or do I wait for the ebook and maybe it never comes out? And those aren't good choices. We want predictability. We want to be able to build a collection that meets the needs of our users. And that's a huge problem. We're still in a world where more than 50% of the books published in the U.S., scholarly books published in the U.S., are not coming out within 2 months of the publication of the print as an ebook. And the 2-month period is really significant because in our approval plans, where books are delivered automatically to libraries, 2 months counts as simultaneous publication. So the approval plan can account for a gap of 2 months in publication and can wait and send you the ebook instead of the print book. 2 months and a day, you either get the print book or you don't get anything. The approval plans can't work with longer than 2 months. And part of that is the structure of the approval plan, but part of that is a problem related to ebooks. Ebooks are often limited to just one or some aggregators. Aggregators such as eBrary or EBSCO ebooks or Books 24/7 or in the old days, NetLibrary or EBL and on. So vendors that aggregate content from many different publishers. But not every publisher gives all of its content to every aggregator, and they're inconsistent about which ones they do give it to. So it's not as easy as saying, I'm going to work with eBrary, and therefore I have access to every ebook. If you work with eBrary, you are inevitably, as a library, not going to have access from some publishers. If you want to have access from a lot of publishers, you have to work with a lot of aggregators, and that becomes time-consuming in terms of an acquisitions workflow and a cataloging and processing workflow. Ebooks require licensing, which is not in and of itself a problem. We require licensing for all sorts of e-resources. We require licensing for our journal packages. We require licensing for our databases. Where it becomes a problem for ebooks is that very often we need to buy something one-off. We need to buy a single title. Somebody wants that particular ebook. They don't want some other ebook on the same topic. They want that ebook. And if it's only available on a platform that you don't yet have licensed, you have to go through a fairly comprehensive and complex and cumbersome licensing process that can take months just to get that one title. So ebooks are confusing in that regard. Because a user doesn't understand, I want that book, but why do I have to wait months to get this book that I should be able to get in a day, right? It's an ebook. Ebooks often, but not always, have usage restrictions, and they vary from vendor to vendor and publisher to publisher, and I'm sure you've all encountered this, that some you can read the entire book from cover to cover. Some you have to open up a chapter and then open up a separate chapter. Some of them you can only read if nobody else is reading it at the same time. There's a limitation of a single user. Some of them you can only print a certain number of pages or download a certain number of pages. And these are there to prevent piracy. They're there to deliberately make it a little bit difficult to steal that content. But what they also do is make it difficult to use that content, and they vary from vendor to vendor and platform to platform, which of course causes further confusion for the end user. And yet, we've been acquiring ebooks at the University of Denver from the beginning. We were one of the very earliest adopters of ebooks anywhere. And not because we're particularly cutting edge, but because NetLibrary, which again was the first major and successful ebook vendor in the academic realm, was in Boulder. They were based just up the road from us. And we signed a deal with the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries, signed a deal with them in 1999 to do what turned out to be the first demand-driven acquisition project. We weren't calling it demand-driven acquisition yet. That term hadn't been coined, but that's what we were doing. We made available tens of thousands of titles in our catalogs, and after the second click, we owned that title. And I'll come back to that model in a little bit. There's some problems to a demand-driven acquisition model where it's too easy to buy the book. You end up buying too much. You end up buying things that people don't actually need. But we were experimenting, and it worked okay for us. And we got our feet wet with ebooks. So we did that for 6 years. There are many academic libraries that in that 6-year period never purchased a single ebook and hadn't purchased an ebook for many years after that. So we were pretty early adopters. When NetLibrary NetLibrary was sold in 2005, and we decided it was time to look and see what else was out there. And in the meantime, a couple of new companies come along. eBrary was one of them, and EBL was another. And we decided to go with eBrary at that point at the University of Denver, and this was a subscription model. And we could pay an annual fee to have access to tens of thousands. Now it's over 100,000 titles on the Academic Complete package. The beauty of the subscription model is that you get a lot of content for a relatively small amount of money. The drawback, the danger, is that you have no control over that content. You don't have any ability to dictate which content stays in the collection. Titles come and go. A publisher can decide, and does decide very often, I don't want my content in that package anymore. I'd rather try to sell it through another aggregator. I'd rather try to sell it direct on my own platform or whatever, and they remove it. So a lot of content, but not a lot of security about that content. But starting in 2005, we decided that subscriptions were a good model for us, and we were going to work with that as one model. Because in 2006, we started to move into different models. In 2006, we added the Duke University Press ebook package. They were one of the first publishers, university presses, to have their own platform and to sell an entire package of content for one price. And so we bought everything from Duke University Press starting that year, and we've continued to do that, mostly because they were the first to market. Springer, which is a large STM publisher, came a little bit after that, and then Oxford University Press, and gradually we've added these packages of content on publisher platforms, and we've integrated ebooks into our approval plan so that when our approval plan, which delivers monographs automatically based on profiles that we've set up, when a book is available and the profile knows that it's available as an ebook, we get the ebook instead of the print. Starting in 2010, we moved back into demand-driven acquisition. Again, we had done demand-driven acquisition without realizing it from 1999 to 2005. Demand-driven acquisition came back and was starting to show up again as a big deal in 2009 or so. And we moved into it in 2010, first with EBL, then with eBrary. We've added EBSCO, we've added JSTOR, and we're going to continue to expand with that. And we were not, again, the earliest adopters of demand-driven acquisition, but we were relatively early, and we were very aggressive, recognizing that it was a way of providing a lot of content for a relatively small amount of money. And I'll talk through that model in more detail. In 2012, we started a demand-driven acquisition project consortially in the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries, where we made content available that we share access to and share purchase of based on user action. And then in 2013, we started doing evidence-based selection at the University of Denver. And evidence-based selection is an alternative model of demand-driven acquisition that works well for a publisher especially who has their own platform but doesn't have the technical infrastructure in place to allow them to do unmediated demand-driven acquisition like EBL does and eBrary does. The evidence-based model allows you to pledge a certain amount of money to that publisher, and they turn on all their content for you, and at the end of the year you purchase up to that amount of money, or you purchase that amount of money that you've contributed. You buy titles up to that value. based on usage throughout the year. So that's how our models have evolved at DU, and you can see that we're doing a lot of different models. We're consequently doing a lot of different packages and platforms. So here's an interesting thing that happened off to the side. We were moving along with ebooks in academic libraries thinking we were pretty cool. We were ahead of the game. We really were ahead of the game. We were doing ebooks in 1999, and they were not on the consumer space for a while after that. Kindle was not the first commercial ebook reader. The Sony reader was out before that. There were a few other things out before the Sony reader. But the Kindle was what made ebooks successful in the consumer realm. And it was quite a while after we'd already moved into ebooks in academic libraries. And yet, it's also quite a while ago, and we haven't quite figured it out still. I think it's worth talking about print versus electronic content, and it's always worth talking about because there's always complaints. There are still complaints about ebooks. And there are some people who say they will absolutely never use an ebook, which is fine. There are actually some people who say they will absolutely never use a print book, which is also fine. Recently, there was a blog post from a philosophy professor at the University of Colorado at Boulder who was furious that the library was buying Oxford University Press titles as ebooks instead of print. And what's interesting about that is that I'm not going to make any judgments about E versus P, but what's interesting about that is that the University of Colorado at Boulder was going from buying some subsection of what was published annually by Oxford University Press in the past in print. They were not buying 100% of the books that were published in print by Oxford University Press. There are very few libraries anywhere that could do that. And then they went to the ebook package, and suddenly they were buying 100%. So they went from having half or so of the titles to having 100% of them, and yet this philosophy professor was upset. So there's still some problems with ebooks, obviously. But one of the things that's interesting to me is that when you start to get a little bit more nuanced in the questions that you ask your users, most people, and I include myself here, prefer one format for some things and the other format for other things. If I want to sit down and read on the couch for pleasure, I don't want to do it on my laptop. I don't even want to do it on the iPad. I want to do it in a print book. But if I'm doing work, I often prefer an ebook format. If I'm looking something up, I prefer an ebook for sure. If I'm traveling, I prefer an ebook just for the ease of not having to carry many things. So we all have preferences depending on the situation. It's not as easy as saying I hate ebooks or I hate print books. Both work for certain things. And so therefore, at the University of Denver, we'll duplicate formats on request. We will buy a print book if we already have the ebook, and we will buy an ebook if we already have the print book, because we recognize that they sometimes serve different needs. Different users, sometimes the same user with different needs. We would love to use demand-driven acquisition to do this on a large scale, essentially loading books in print into our catalog. Every print book in print that meets our needs in terms of academic content, and then buying it for users if we don't already have it. But we do prefer electronic when we have to make a choice up front. When we have to decide on a format versus format, we prefer electronic for the reasons I talked about earlier on, especially the fact that it can be used remotely and that it saves shelf space. So how do we acquire ebooks? There are a lot of different models, and as I talked about earlier, it's frustrating and confusing. One model is title by title. You can go in and you can pick each title that matches your collecting needs. There's a lot of flexibility that way. You only buy what you think you need, not necessarily what you turn out to need. But it's more expensive per title. You pay full price per title when you're buying an ebook as a single title. It's potentially cheaper overall if you're never buying anything speculatively. It's time-consuming. It takes a lot of time to go through lists of titles and choose them. But some libraries want to do title-by-title selection, and there are times when it makes sense for that particular need. And then some of us decide to do packages. You end up, so you can buy everything published by Oxford University Press, everything published by Springer, everything published by whoever. And we do that with quite a few publishers. Obviously, you end up with some content that isn't relevant to your local needs. If you're buying everything published by Springer, to take one publisher at random, and you don't have a program in engineering, you're going to have a lot of engineering titles in that package that don't meet local curricular needs. But it's often cheaper anyway because you get a substantial discount for buying that entire package. You don't have to worry about whether it's the right title. You know that you have everything. It frees up selector time because nobody has to choose. And it's sometimes a good selection, a good option for particular subjects or particular types of materials. So you might decide to do this for some types of books or for some subjects, but not for every subject. And you could mix and match different selection models. And then there are a variety of access models as well, and subscription is one. And I talked about subscription earlier when we moved to eBrary and got the Academic Complete package, where we suddenly had hundreds of thousands of ebooks available to our users. A subscription package allows you to get a large collection, sometimes a huge collection, at a pretty low cost. Sometimes 10 cents a book, that kind of incredibly low cost. It's definitely cheaper per title. eBrary Academic Complete is one example. It's often a mix of backlist and frontlist content, and it's often weighted a little more heavily towards that backlist content, so older content. In the publishing world, frontlist is the most recent 3 years. 3 years is when most books in the academic publishing world get sold. The lifetime of a book typically is that first 3 years, and anything that's sold after that is bonus. Frontlist is that period roughly, and then the backlist is everything that's published beyond that. And very often these subscription packages are weighted towards the backlist content, which some librarians say, well, I don't want to be paying for old stuff. My feeling is, well, if we already have it in print and we now also have it in ebook format, that's great. Gives people a choice. If we didn't have it in print and now we have it in ebook, that's even greater because we have access to a title we didn't have before. If it is a subject area in the humanities and it's a title that is 10 or 15 years old but it hasn't gone out of date, what's the problem? So I don't have that feeling, but there are librarians who say I don't want to invest again in backlist content. I need to invest in frontlist content, and that sometimes depends on the subject area. Certainly, if you're in an area where currency is tremendously important, a backlist collection is less valuable. With a subscription model, there's no guarantee of long-term availability of that content. That content can go away at any time, and we've had occasions where a publisher has said, you know, I'm done with eBrary. I don't want to be part of this package anymore. I'm pulling all my content. There have been times when they've said, I'm fine to continue working with eBrary, but I'm not going to be part of this package. If you want these titles, we're happy to sell them to you, but you can't rent them anymore. But that's a risk that you deal with, and it's a model that we're pretty much okay with in the journal realm. We have a lot of packages that are very similar in the way we think about them. A subscription model is also useful for content that might become obsolete quickly, so technology or medicine or business. There are a lot of packages where you can do a subscription to very current content in areas that age very quickly. These subscriptions tend to be more expensive per title, but they give you access to current content and they remove that older content fairly quickly. And a subscription package can be useful to introduce critical mass. And critical mass is an important concept in ebooks. What we found, although I don't think anybody's done a a true study on this, is that if you have a lot of ebooks, you have more use of ebooks. And it's not so much that if you have two ebooks will get used, and if you have four will get used. It's more that if you have 10 ebooks, nobody ever finds them. If you have 100 ebooks, somebody might find one of them. If you have 1,000 ebooks, somebody might find 50 of them. The more you have, the more likely it is that they're going to be found within your larger collection. So critical mass is pretty important. Perpetual access is another model. And so instead of subscription, you pay and you license permanent access to that material. There's a higher cost than subscription for perpetual access because you're paying for it once. You're essentially buying it. You're not really buying it. You're buying a license to it, but you're buying it forever. It can behave though like a subscription if you're buying content from the same publisher every year. And I'll use Springer again as an example. When we buy everything that Springer publishes, if we buy 2010, 2011, 2012, it's tough to decide, you know what, we're done, we're not going to buy 2013. So it behaves like a subscription in terms of budget commitment. And when you have to make a commitment in your budget instead of a one-time cost, it's harder to manage that money. So there's some drawbacks to perpetual access, the high cost, the fact that it still behaves like a subscription, but you do have the guaranteed access. And then there are multiple user models to sort through. There's often a single user model, and librarians often complain about the single user model, and ideally we would not have to worry about a single user model. But given the choice between a single user and a multiple user, I tend to choose the single user. The single user model is often cheaper. It's often the list price of the book, or maybe even less than the list price of the book. It's ideal for most books in most libraries because most books don't get used by multiple people at once. Most books don't get used, or if they do get used, they get used once or twice ever. And so a single user model is actually ideal for academic libraries for most content. There are a variety of multiple user models. Sometimes it's a defined number. You can lease it for 3 users. You can lease it for 5 users. Sometimes it's unlimited users. It's often more expensive, and in fact, when there's a choice between unlimited users or multiple users and a single user, it's always more expensive to get a multiple user model. It's often, as I said already, with the single users, unnecessary. You don't need to have a multiple user model for most books, but it makes a lot of sense if a book is put on reserve, if it's assigned for a course, or if you have proven usage over time. It sometimes makes sense to buy that title again or repay for it as a multiple user model. The user models can be really difficult to keep track of, and here's just the eBrary as an example. eBrary has the single user purchase option, which is called SUPO, the multiple user purchase option, which is called MUPO. MUPO is unlimited use. SUPO is a single use. Or single user. The NUPO, the numerous single user purchase option, is available for titles that don't allow multiple users, but you could buy many copies of a SUPO title. So you could essentially build a 3-user title by buying it 3 times. eBrary also has extended access as something that they've been talking about but haven't done yet, where there would be an automatic upgrade from SUPO to MUPO, from single user to multiple user, based on a trigger. Essentially, if somebody's in that single user book already and somebody else tries to get into it, the library would automatically pay up and get the multiple user version instead. And that's a great way of thinking about how this should work. EBL has different models. The nonlinear lending model, which is unlimited concurrent users, but only 325 of those uses a year. So if 325 people use it one day, you're done with that title in that first day. But in reality, it gets used across the year, and the 325 is ideal. It works fine. We have hundreds of thousands of EBL titles in our catalog, and we've never hit that 325 uses in a year. They also have an unlimited access model, but I don't really know why you would have it when you have this nonlinear lending model. Demand-driven acquisition is appealing to libraries because it solves a lot of problems we've had for years. It's user-driven access. It's access to content based on user needs. It allows you to offer many more books than you ever could have in the past. So instead of buying a book and hoping it gets used, I provide access to a dozen books. And if one of them gets used, I've spent the same amount of money as I did when I bought that one book in the past. It allows libraries to acquire only what they need. So you provide access to a lot, you buy the things that have proven need. It allows you to build this much bigger collection because of that. And this is why libraries have been moving to demand-driven acquisition pretty aggressively. The EBL model for demand-driven acquisition, which has been adopted by most of the major vendors in the last few years, has three components, essentially. The early part, the first part, is a free browse. It's 5 minutes of discovery. And then if you're out of that book within 5 minutes, there's no cost to the library. And this is important because it allows you to discover whether it's the right book or not, and then move away from it if it turns out to be the wrong book. And then there's no cost to the library. There's a short-term loan, and that's customizable. You could do one short-term loan. You could have 5 short-term loans. So the library can set up how many short-term loans it's willing to pay for on the same title. The short-term loan allows you to lease a book, which makes sense because most books never get used more than that one time. Most books get used once. Nobody ever goes back to that book. If you have multiple short-term loans, you can then trigger it so that there's an auto purchase, and the library then owns that book, but only for the books that get used the most amounts of time. So the key components here are this free discovery period, right? There's this brief time in the book of under 5 minutes. Sometimes free discovery can be free access to the front matter or the back matter, the table of contents or the index. And the way to think about this is it allows you to pay only for intentional use. So sometimes there's somebody using a book, but it's not a book they mean to use. I click into this book, I realize it's on the wrong topic, I click out, I shouldn't have to buy it. Short-term loan allows you to pay for the amount of use. A few uses, you only lease it. Many uses, you buy it. And then you purchase it only for titles that have significant use over whatever amount you've set for your short-term loan limit. And here's how it's worked at the University of Denver. I've got this little bar here. I don't know if you see it or not. It's blocking my screen. All right. So in the 4 years or so that we've been doing demand-driven acquisition through EBL at DU, we've purchased 1,337 titles for $116,000. That's the list price for those books. If we had bought those titles up front, we would have spent the same amount of money. There are 10,000 titles, or more than 10,000 titles, that had at least one short-term loan. And we spent only $161,000 for those, actually, for those 16,000 short-term loans across those 10,000 titles. The list price, if we had bought each of those titles, would have been almost $1 million. 17,000 titles had at least one browse of under 5 minutes. We paid nothing for that free browse, and the list price for those books is about $1.5 million. So if we had bought all of these books up front that people had some level of interest in, we would have spent $2.3 million instead of the 280,000 that we actually spent. So it's a really tremendous savings. And you can see right there why it's appealing. Evidence-based selection, I mentioned earlier, is a model that was pioneered by Elsevier, but a number of other publishers have done that. You commit to giving that publisher a bunch of money up front. They give you access to all their titles. You purchase those titles based on usage patterns. It's a model where the library has more control. But there's a risk in that if you commit $50,000 at the beginning of the year, but only $30,000 worth of those titles get used, you end up spending money on titles that don't get used. So here's how it works out in practice in my library, and I think this slide and the next one are I think illustrate it nicely. So we have a variety of subscription packages, and you can see the vendors there, and that accounts for about 46% of the 575,000 ebook titles we have available in our catalog. We have perpetual access, where we've bought packages or title-by-title selection to about 13% of those titles. About 36% of those titles are available through demand-driven acquisition. We've made records available in the catalog, but we haven't purchased them yet. And about 5% of these titles are available through this evidence-based selection model, where we load titles and commit to spending a certain amount of money with that publisher. And yet, when you look at the percentage of what we're spending on ebooks versus the percentage of the titles that are available, you see it's pretty different, right? So 31% of our subscription packages, or 31% of our budget goes to subscription packages, but that's 46% of the content. 13% of the content is perpetual access. 42% of the budget goes to perpetual access. DDA is 21% of the budget, but 36% of the content. And so right here you see that demand-driven acquisition and subscription are models that allow you to stretch your dollars and provide a much bigger collection to your users. They're user-friendly models at the trade-off of less long-term access to content. We're buying a lot of other ebooks through primary source collections, so things published in the 18th century, the 17th century, and earlier, 19th century and earlier actually. We have almost 500,000 of these titles now, and I'm not even talking about those in this discussion. So that's a whole other realm of ebooks that makes a difference for a certain set of humanities researchers. All right, so I'm going to run through some budget numbers really quickly before we finish, because I think these are important. And I've divided the budget in this slide into two categories. The entire collections budget into one-time cost, so things where we buy it and we don't have to pay anything for it again. Most obvious example would be a book. I buy a print book, give the publisher the cost of that book, I put it on the shelf. Ongoing, traditional example would be a journal. I get that journal for this year, it comes again next year, and the year after. I have to commit that money year after year. So we used to commit about 65% of our budget. It's in the last 6 years, it's moved up to 75% of the budget is ongoing. And we're budgeting a little bit more in the coming year. This is a problem. It's hard to manage a budget that is overwhelmingly committed to ongoing costs. And then digital versus tangible. I've divided the budget in a number of ways, and I think what's interesting is that the ebooks fall into two of these broad categories. What I think is important about this slide is the tangible items. That last item on the bottom, the 18%, just over $1 million. Print, content, DVDs, CDs, and so on. A very small percentage of what we're buying at this point is tangible material. Most of what we buy is digital. And then one-time spending. This is removing all the subscription content. And you can see that monographs at the bottom have steadily declined. Print monographs have steadily declined over the last 6 years. They're predicted to go up this year, which is a little bit misleading in that we budgeted a little bit more, but that doesn't mean that we'll spend a little more. That money will probably end up getting spent on other things by the end of the year. There's some wiggle room in the monographs budget. The red bar is demand-driven acquisition. In fiscal year 10, there actually is a tiny sliver of red that you can't even see. But demand-driven acquisition has grown over that time period. Ebook outright purchases have also grown. And then this other perpetual access to digital involves journal back files, primary source collections, other things where we've bought digital packages. And you can see, though, that print is a smaller and smaller percentage of what we spend on a one-time basis. And then books, this is just what we spend on books, ebooks or print books. The horizontal black bars are the print over the years, and you can see it's gone steadily down. The red is the approval plan, and the blue at the bottom is other monographs that we've ordered directly. Those have both decreased, as ebook expenditures represented in the bars above, or the colors above the bars, have gone up each year. And again, you can see that we're spending more and more on ebook subscriptions and demand-driven acquisition, but we still, the larger portion is for these outright purchases of ebooks, which is an interesting thing. And then books versus everything. So here's if you isolate books, including ebooks, it doesn't matter what model for ebooks. You can see that at the bottom, the blue. It's a pretty small portion of what we do in our budget. So we've just talked about ebooks, but most of what we do is subscriptions to things, especially journals. That's the biggest portion of our budget. So the green bars, these subscriptions, are really where most of our money goes. So what's it all mean? I think that ebooks especially, and journals to some extent, e-journals to some extent, allow us to think about our collections in a different way. Maybe a better way, but definitely a different way. It used to be that the collection was the end. We talked about collection development, we talked about collection building, we talked about collection management. Everything we did was about the collection. We talked about perpetual access, we talked about the future. We were buying things for somebody who might come to the university someday. And that's what we've always done with print. We can transition to the collection as a means of providing access to content to our current users, which is what our mission is, right? If you go back to the mission statement, the second model, which is not what we used to do, it much more directly relates to our mission. So the collection is a means to the end. We provide access. We do subscriptions. We do demand-driven acquisition. We are serving our current users. We're hoping that we serve our future users. There are other ways of thinking about the future user, and I don't have time to talk about that, but I can answer that in questions. But the future user is served in a very different way. There's a tremendous potential for ebooks, right? There's a vast collection to meet current needs, the variety of access models, a variety of selection models. Really, whatever's cheapest, whatever's most efficient, we'll do it. Every title ideally should be available as an ebook. It's not now. Every title would be available in multiple formats. The user could choose the format. The library could choose the model, could choose the platform. And that's where I hope we get, but we aren't yet. So I realize we're at the sort of the end of our time. I know Jeremy told me we could go a little over with questions if we need to. So I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so Monica, go ahead.
Thank you. So I actually heard in the news last week, a couple weeks ago, that there's a new university in Florida, Florida Polytechnic University, and they just opened up their library building, which has no print books at all. Their whole collection is, they have put a certain amount of money towards titles and ebooks, and then if one student requests a book, they can access it. If a second student requests a book, they can get, or the university will buy that title digitally. It's all digital.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so and they have quite a robust interlibrary loan policy with the other Florida State University libraries or Florida library system or however it works in Florida. But I was wondering if you thought that that was a viable way to have a library, and if maybe if there was any potential for libraries
that have print collections to like adopt this model going forward? Like, have you ever heard of anyone considering like only buying digital books in the future because that's the way they think things are going, or is this Florida thing a one-off and everyone else is going to have to? Well, I mean, everyone's going to be watching them to see what will happen, or you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's a great question, and it's a model that we've actually heard of in the past. So, University of California Merced, which was the newest of the University of California system, opened within the last decade or so, and California State University Channel Islands, two new universities in California, both were talking about doing that. Neither of them was ultimately able to, but mostly because there weren't enough ebooks then. So what they were going to do is rely on their respective systems, the CSU system or the University of California system, and they were not going to buy print. What happened in reality is they had to buy some print, and I think that will probably happen at this institution too. But yeah, I think if you're and I'll add that there are more and more conversations consortially and nationally about what is often termed a collective collection. So how do you manage this overlapping print collection that we've built up across all of our institutions? I have this title, you have this title, you have this title. There are thousands of this title across the country, and yet nobody's using it. Why do we need more than a dozen of them? And how do you downsize the collections of print in a rational way and still make them accessible to everybody? It seems to me that if you were building a library now, if you were starting a university now, it would not make a lot of sense to think about investing heavily in print. It makes sense to preserve your print if you have it. It makes sense to build a print collection in terms of special collections and archives, although it maybe doesn't if you're starting from scratch and your special collections are going to be digital. But no, I think it's a model that makes sense, and it makes sense especially given the fact that we're having these conversations, very serious conversations with rules and strategies and procedures about how to downsize print collections and collaborate to provide access to those collections. So it's a model that really does make sense for some libraries, not for every library. Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Kate.
Hi, Michael. I actually am bringing up something that I also just read about, which was the Massachusetts State eBook pilot project, and I was curious if you had any thoughts about that. My understanding is that they're looking at the technology infrastructure for addressing licensing issues, and I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that, although, so is that a public library initiative? Do you know?
It's funded in part by IMLS.
Right.
But it's Massachusetts-based. They're not doing it nationally.
Right, right. But so I think I've sort of talked to somebody who was part of that project at the Charleston conference a year ago, and I think it was a public library and state library initiative within Massachusetts, but I may be wrong. But if so, yeah, they've done some similar things in Colorado, where some of the public systems have talked about tools to manage ebooks in a better way, and I don't want to dismiss what public libraries are doing. I just want to say that what they're doing is so radically different, and their needs are so radically different than academic libraries that it's almost like we really do need to have two separate conversations, and overlap in some cases, but not in others. So the example for me that really clinches it is when HarperCollins 4, 5, 6 years ago said to public libraries, and to Overdrive, right? They were working with Overdrive to provide their ebooks to public libraries. They said, I can't remember what the number was, but I'll say 16. They said, we'll allow 16 uses. After 16 uses, you have to buy it again. And from an academic library perspective, that's great. Sure, I think we'd come out ahead. If we did that with every book, every ebook, and we said we get unlimited use up to 16 users or uses in a year, after 16 we buy it again, we would end up spending less on books than if we just bought them and had unlimited use. We don't have enough use for that to make a difference. For public libraries, that's huge, and it was a big outcry. So there's very different issues, I think, and there are different issues in terms of how you provide access. Overdrive is the primary model in public libraries. In academic libraries, we use different tools. So I don't, which is, so I'm saying all this without actually knowing anything about this project, but I think any project that is exploring new ways of delivering content and sharing content, particularly getting content onto users' preferred reading devices, is a good thing. And I'll continue and say, we've been having a ridiculous discussion in my library recently about how to provide access to Kindle-only ebooks. So there aren't that many, but there are not that many requests, but there are requests for titles where the only version of that title is a Kindle ebook. You can't buy a Kindle book and stick it on your library webpage and let people use it. It doesn't work that way. Amazon certainly doesn't want it to work that way. We talked about, well, maybe we'll just buy it and give it to the user. It's cheaper than interlibrary loan, probably, right? It's $9.99. But we don't want to advertise that we're doing that because we don't want people to realize that we could become their purchaser of Kindle books, everything they want. We want to do it in the context of the academic library. So we've settled on the fact that we're going to buy some Kindles. We already have some, but we're going to buy some more Kindles, and we're going to load them with these books as people request them, and we're going to lend out the Kindle with that ebook on it, which is absolutely ridiculous, right? That we're going to take away most of the benefits of an ebook and lend them this physical thing with the ebook on it. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, even though I don't know what the project is in Massachusetts, I think that there's a tremendous need for investing time and effort into better delivery models, especially models that get it onto the devices that our users are accessing ebooks on, or want to access ebooks on.
And Michael, I just wanted to mention, if you click back over to the main room chat, Monica and Kate have both put links there that you can access the articles that they refer to.
Cool, great, thanks.
Leah, you had a question, go ahead.
Indeed. If you're interested in more about ebooks in the public library, I know Douglas County is one of the counties that created their own server system to store their own ebooks that they created. So if you're interested, a little off topic, but it's useful.
And that one I know quite a bit about. Jamie LaRue there started. Yeah, that I know about because that's local.
Yeah, that is local here stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But my other question was, so a lot of the ebook content is purchased and it's with a subscription and it's a yearly fee. Do those subscriptions update the content like every year to keep it current, or are you paying for specific ebooks and then that's what you pay for and it never changes?
No, they all changes, and that's one of the important benefits of a subscription model, that the content gets updated over time. It's not. I don't think it's fair to say it makes it current, because some of them are never current and they're not designed to be current. Some of them make sure it's only current, and I'll use two examples. So Books 24/7 is a package of, they do a number of different things, but we have a package of computer manuals through them. And our deal, I think, is that we get the most recent 3 years, and each year the previous year falls off the back, right? So we always only have the most recent 3 years. So that's one model, and it's absolutely current content and current content only. And then eBrary's Academic Complete package is a different model. It's a range of older and newer content, more on the older side. And by older, I don't mean 1972. I mean more likely 2003. And new content gets added. Old content sometimes gets removed, and we get access to whatever's in that package. And every year that package grows, and our cost per year doesn't grow at the same rate. So our cost per year goes up a little bit, but it doesn't go up as a percentage of the collection size as a whole.
Great. I had one question for you as well, Michael. You had mentioned that you had a fairly large collection of humanities ebook primary content, and that those numbers were, separate in terms of your analysis and what you were talking about today. Across the trade titles and your scholarly pubs and your textbooks, have you done any type of analysis about disciplines or at the sort of content level or just the ebook level, I guess, disciplinary usage in terms of swapping, maybe textbooks from print to digital or just overall usage from the different disciplines?
I haven't done anything with textbooks, partly because textbooks are a real problem and they're entire separate presentation because they're such a problem. And the reason the textbooks are a problem is that publishers won't sell them to libraries at a one-off rate because they don't want to replace sales of, say, 50 of that textbook for a class of 70 students with the purchase of one e-textbook by the library that they provide access to the entire campus. Further, the library can't afford to buy that e-textbook at some multiple of list price based on the fact that it happens to be a textbook. So textbooks are a tremendous problem, and nobody's come up with a good solution in the library realm. So I haven't done any analysis because we don't really have any. I have done analysis of publisher use by publisher types, so university press versus other press. I've done analysis at the subject level. I've certainly done analysis at the package level, this package versus that package. Most of my subject analysis and most of my publisher analysis are within a particular package, so within eBrary, within EBL. And that's partly because the usage statistics are not directly comparable from platform to platform. So it's hard to say this pattern holds true across these two different platforms because, and I'll give you one example of that. In the counter report, so the counter project counter is the standard model for providing usage data, and it's good. It's actually incredibly good for journal content, for article usage. It's not very good for ebooks, and it's part of that is that the major report for ebook usage is in Counter reports section requests. So how many times was a section requested when used? But it allows the publisher or the vendor to define section. And it doesn't, even though it requires them to tell you what the section is, they don't always do it. So they're supposed to, if they're defining section as chapter, they're supposed to tell you at the top of that spreadsheet report that they're using chapter as the definition of section. But very few of them actually put in the definition. And so instead you get this number and you have to kind of guess. And what I've guessed from looking at the eBrary version of that report is that their section is probably a page. In others, it's a chapter. In others, it is a larger part of the book than even a chapter. And it's very frustrating because you can't compare eBrary to EBL to Oxford because they're all defining section requests differently. So you can only compare within that particular vendor. So that said, I've done some comparisons that look at humanities use versus other use. And in fact, I'm going to give a presentation at Charleston next month that focuses on humanities use of ebooks in eBrary and in EBL, but obviously I can't compare across. So it's eBrary separately from EBL. And what I can say is that there are, it's not very easy to answer. In fact, it's impossible to say ebooks in this area are used more than ebooks in that area. What is easy to say is ebooks in this area are used differently from ebooks in that area. And if you think about immersive reading versus quick reading, there's a scale, and not surprisingly, in the humanities, especially in history, people spend more time in the book. There's a larger percentage of books used in some disciplines than in others. So when you have a large ebook collection, you can be pretty confident that a lot of books are going to be used in the H's, which is business and social sciences, and you can be pretty confident that a relatively small percentage of books in the U's and the V's, which is military and naval science, are going to get used. None of that's actually surprising. It kind of confirms things that we've always known. And I should say that I've done some analysis of ebook usage versus print usage, and what also came out there is none of this is really that surprising. The thing that came through loud and clear when I did the usage of ebooks versus print books, when we had the same title available, is that if a title gets used in one format, it's more likely to get used in the other format. Good books get used. Or to put it a different way, books that matter to the University of Denver and to our user community get used. And it doesn't matter what format, which is kind of interesting, because you could say, or you could expect that print books would get used more in the humanities and ebooks would get used more in engineering. You could expect that, but it turns out, and I think that is true, but it turns out that if a book gets used in one format, it becomes more likely that it gets used in the other format. But there are a lot of ways of looking at ebook use, and I don't think many people have, myself included, have done enough or have dug deeply enough. I don't think we have a full understanding, and I don't think we have a full enough understanding of how people use print books either. And I think that ebooks give us an opportunity to get a better understanding of how people use monographs, and hopefully we can try to extrapolate from what we can learn from ebook usage, where it's easier to measure use, back to print book use, where it's very hard to measure use.
Well, I'm even more disappointed now that I won't be attending Charleston this year.
Sorry. It'll be up on SlideShare.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I'm sure I'll see it when it goes on SlideShare.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone else? On the topic of recordings, I did just want to mention that our event tonight has been recorded. We will be making that available through the ASIS website. We're sending it to Michael so he can post it anywhere he would like to as well. But please do drop us an email if you would like that directly. And if there's no other questions, I'm just going to remind you again to please, I put it in the chat, please fill out the post-event survey. Let us know what you thought and if you have any suggestions for future events. Thank you to Michael for a great presentation and answering all of our questions, and to everyone else for coming tonight and having such great questions. Next week we're doing an event on open access academia with Mark Hannell from Figshare, so I hope all of you can join us for that. And thank you again for coming tonight, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Cheers.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye.